Did everybody see this, the final assignment, edited collection? Is this logical and make sense to you?
Yes.
So did I actually give it? I tried to give an example, I think.
Yay.
Yes, ma'am, that was very helpful. Dr. Stewart, what's an approximate number of articles we should shoot for? Is there a number, or is it just, whatever
What
fits?
did we say?
10.
Yeah, 8 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just had a lot of people perk up. 8? Did you say 8?
I think she said 8.
I think you said 8.
8 to 10. It's in recording. Yeah,
If you get 3,000 words from 8.
this seems to be really logical for me, to me, for how I would imagine seeing it. It's got different pages. Everything is in one document. So I don't want to see 3 documents pop up. I want one document. It's the easy button approach. And then, so you have the table of contents, where you have the title and the author. And then, part 1, this is part 2. There could be part 3. There should be at least 2 or 3 in each section, in each part. Then your title, and so that's where you put your introduction. Was that introduction was, and that's where you contextualize, set it all up, and then what you cite in that introduction will go right after that. And then if you quote from an article in the edited collection, also included here. And then your page break and your bit of information with annotations. So that hopefully gets everything really straightened out and pretty clear. Because I'm known for not being clear, apparently. Sometimes I feel like it. I guess we should start maybe with people online first, because so much can go wrong. Okay, who's going first? Is it you, Andrea?
Yeah, I think
because I've got yours pulled up.
Okay, good. Because I almost got the share figured out, but yeah, you could pull that up. That'd be great.
Okay, so just tell me when to advance.
Okay. Alex, did I have yours as well?
And
And
Emily's.
mine.
Are you
Okay.
serious?
Okay. So my edited collection, I wanted to talk about the queer community, the LGBTQ community, and representation within academia and within children's literature and young adult literature in particular. If you go ahead and advance the next slide. So I want you all to look at these novels. These are just a few of the novels that I did research on and that my edited collection covers or slightly mentions. And I want to see if any of you recognize them.
I do. Quite a few.
Yeah, Dr. Stewart, you might, being in the field for quite
Because that's my job.
Yeah.
That's my job.
I included some articles in my edited collection that mention these books.
Okay. But has anyone read any of these novels?
I started reading Boy Meets Boy, and honestly, I was bored, and I stopped after like 5 pages.
Yeah. Well, so that one I would understand. It's kind of stereotypical boy character in high school meets another boy. That's. But some of these novels and short children's books are pretty pivotal and groundbreaking for the queer community. And in my edited collection, if you go ahead and advance the next slide, in my edited collection, if I did a call for papers, I would ask for my scholars to answer these next questions, to answer what are the representations that we see of LGBTQ community members, and what does queer literature look like? So first, Blackburn responded with these 2 articles and said, well, I'm going to analyze the talk that we have about queer literature and she examines the queer elements within 2 novels. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I want to say it's Boy Meets Boy, and I'll get there. I'll get there if it better be worth the trip.
Mm-hmm.
So she does a really good job doing that with her and her colleagues. So she answers what queer young adult literature looks like. And then if you go advance the next slide. The next part I wanted everyone to answer was who was being represented. Within the queer community, everyone battles with, is it everyone is being represented within queer literature, or is it just bits and pieces of different individuals? Is it just the lesbian community, gay community, bisexual community, etc.? And I had several people respond to those in my search, and
This is very clever, the way
Yeah.
you've done this.
and everyone responded with different perspectives. They said, well, I see a lot of queer visibility and invisibility, and they analyzed children's novels, and particularly a lot of nonfiction and fiction novels, where they took those characters that were represented as queer or maybe bisexual or not sexual at all, and tried to figure out, were they a part of the community or were they not? And in particular, the bisexual means, essence of the bisexual comes up again. The bisexual battle of, is it being represented, are these characters being represented as bisexual, is difficult to understand. And she talks about it a lot better than I can. But she says basically, and a lot of my authors on the next slide talk about, are bisexuals represented as honestly, or are they represented as too flippant? And then the next call that I got was from Epstein, Coletta, and Cummins, and Crisp, and they respond back with the community members that are being erased. So within queer,
Is that-
young adult.
Is that Thomas Crisp by any chance?
Yes, I believe so.
That all heterosexual, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
And so they all respond and they say, well, we have the people who are being represented, but these are the people that are being erased within literature. And bisexuality is one of the top individuals that are not represented as much. And Cummins says, in her article, which is published in a lesbian journal, she says, even though I'm being published in a lesbian journal, my article isn't as important because lesbians are being erased as I'm speaking. And it's a really interesting take on it. And then I end my collection with All Heterosexual World for nonfiction, because in total literature gives that kick of the overall heterosexual world that are either being erased, that queer people are being erased from, or being misrepresented or misunderstood. And then next slide.
Okay.
There's one last one. The different perspectives I took include butlerism or butlerian.
Yeah.
There's 2 different calls. There's 2 different names for that one. So Judith Butler, the philosopher who puts a different perspective into queer theory and feminism. And I don't know if I have enough time to go through the quotes, but Judith Butler essentially said that gender was an act, and that her saying that changed queer theory and its interpretations as well. And then there's some of my keywords at the side there, and that's what my edited collection is going to go over this.
Yeah, Butler says that we perform our gender, that we learn how to do that, and that for so very long we've been caught in binaries as to performing this way or that way. And then she brings in like drag shows and talks about how that is such an obvious performance that it
Yeah.
lets us see how we perform gender, the more traditional genders. And and that goes again with identity and subjectivity, because identity, performing something turns identity on its head,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. A lot of my my academics responded and said that prescribing that identity is something that queer theory just kind of turns on its head as well. It's like, just don't, we don't want to do that in literature, and we want to stay away from that. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. Now, a little bit about, I've read many of these. I just don't remember most of them. Like, I don't remember most of the novels I read anymore unless I've read them several times.
Mhm.
I do know that Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate were, those are picture books, and
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, on my last slide, I have those pictures of those picture books up there. Yeah, I just put those pictures up so we could kind of see what they look like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think those were the most famous of the time period. For Heather Has Two Moms.
Those were the,
Yeah.
those started it all.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily very well written or illustrated, but it got the conversation started.
Yeah.
Do you have another slide there? No. Okay.
No, that was it.
Now, George, I'm not familiar with.
George is about a young transgender girl who identifies as Melissa, but everyone keeps calling her George. So it's her story telling her perspective as a him. So it's a really interesting little story. It's for young adults, children.
Okay.
Because
go ahead.
Oh, the story isn't very. It's maybe 150 pages long, but it's not very long at all.
Okay. Is it good?
I haven't finished it, but it is pretty good so far.
Okay, good. Annie on My Mind. Do you remember who that's by?
Annie on My Mind. Oh, I had notes here. Oh, I might not have written her note. Her author, because I have Boy Meets Boy.
I've read this one. I just can't remember who. Nancy Garden. 1982, published in 1982. Story of two teenage girls whose friendship blossoms into love, and who, despite pressures from family and school that threaten their relationship, promise to be true to each other and their feelings. And then Dance on My Grave. I've definitely read that one. Aidan Chambers. He's a really been a prolific writer, if I'm not mistaken. Aidan Chambers. What else have you written? Oh, I know he's written more than that, hasn't he? Yeah. Well, no, Break Time. He wrote Break Time.
Postcards from No Man's Land. Oh.
Life in a seaside town is uneventful for Hal Robinson. Nothing unusual, exciting, or odd ever happens to him until now, that is, until the summer of his 16th birthday, when he reaches the crossroads of choices in life. He foolishly takes a friend's boat for a day's sailing, gets into difficulty, and is rescued by Barry Gorman. The ensuing relationship results in a tumultuous summer for Hal as he experiences the intense emotions of first teenage love. And then Break Time is followed. I thought Break Time was second, but apparently it's first.
The zombie one that's here is this part of a series as well. Attack of the Soul. That's a part of a series.
So it is the Russell Middlebrook series.
Geography Club.
Looks like he's pretty prolific too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much. Okay, Megan, you ready?
I am.
I've got you posted up here.
Sweet. Hey everybody. So the title of my edited collection is The Unseen Ones, The Effects of Bullying on Invisibility in Young Adult Literature. I wanted to talk about something that I have had experience with and that I wanted to get more interest and more knowledge out there about this topic. And honestly, it was a really hard topic to find stuff about in the literature sense of it. It was more like scientific articles and things like that, studies they've done about bullying and everything like that. Sorry, I'm adjusting my camera so I can talk with my hands, like lose things. Again, I apologize for my voice. It's coming and going, so we're gonna work with it.
Do you want to wait till next week?
No, because I probably will be the same thing because kids, it is what it is.
Ongoing forevermore.
Ongoing forever until summer. Let's just hit the ground running. All right, if you'll advance to the next one for me, Dr. Stewart.
Okay.
So I kind of broke down what bullying is as a topic for you guys here. So it says, what is bullying? Bullying, according to one of my articles, is a repetitive pattern of aggression, either physical, verbal, mental, or cyberbullying, which is a new trend that has not so new, but new like the internet is new. And then the article also goes into why they bully, why the bullies bully. It's a way of maintaining their current status in life. So their social status, their power in the school, or it could be their way of coping with things that happen at home. Bullying is a social thing. So they are, the best way that I can do it, and I use this analogy in my edited collection introduction. I use it in my introduction. I use it like a wolf pack. There are 3 tiers to a wolf pack that everybody knows: alphas, betas, and omegas. The alphas are in charge, yet to keep that power, they have to bully their way through. They have to bully the betas and the omegas, because if a beta thinks he's strong enough, he can challenge the alpha, and if the alpha loses, he doesn't have his power anymore. So that's the way I kind of think about it when I'm thinking about the bullying and what is going on. Anybody can become a victim. Anybody, no matter your popularity status, no matter your age. There is workplace bullying, there is school bullying, there is home bullying. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. Anybody can be a victim. Now, defining a bully is a little bit different than defining what bullying is. Defining a bully, you have to look at the risk factors. So if you're at risk, according to this article, of being a bully, you are less communicative than your fellow students or your fellow coworkers. You have not so great problem solving skills, so you are behind the curve when it comes to fixing things, fixing your own problems. You don't really have a good conflict resolution. You don't really have well developed conflict resolution skills. You tend to fly off the handle. You're a little bit of a hothead, things like that. And you also have poor self-regulation, meaning that if I want to go out and slap my neighbor because he yelled at me 3 weeks ago, I'm going to go out and slap my neighbor. It doesn't matter when it happened or what exactly happened. It's just, I want to do it, so I'm going to do this. If you would go ahead and advance for me.
That makes sense.
It really does. Bullying is something that is so commonplace that we tend to kind of gloss it over. We gloss over these actions and we kind of just clump them onto this one group of people, but it can be anybody. It can be anybody, anywhere, anytime. So now we dive into the examples in the literature. Some of the articles, most of the articles actually that I have included in my edited collection include the novels listed here. So Anderson's Speak, Asher's 13 Reasons Why, Bystander by Preller, The Reluctant Journal of Henry Kay, and The Bully Book. Now, the main 2 that I talk about in my introduction are Speak and 13 Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why, everybody knows that there's a Netflix show out that is on, I think, season 2 or 3. I'm not sure. I don't watch it. But that's
I don't either.
I haven't even read the book, but I know it's about bullying and drastic consequences that she has. I tried to read it. It was really boring, and it didn't work. Speak, yeah. I have read. Speak, I have read, though. And Speak is actually a triple threat, according to my recollection, when it comes to breaking barriers. Speak not only talks about sexual assault and bullying, but it also talks about student-teacher relations in a way that not a lot of books are going to talk about, because the one person that she found that she could talk to was her art teacher. She couldn't talk to her parents. She couldn't talk to her fellow students. She talked to her art teacher. And I love that they gave her that person as being a teacher, because the teachers are the people that we want to look up to when we're in school. So that to me is just my personal beliefs. I love that it was the art teacher. But every one of these novels deals with bullying in one way or another. As I said, for Speak, it's a triple threat. We see the sexual harassment, we see the bullying, that results off of both the assault itself and the fact that she canceled a party. She canceled the party by calling the cops. She was a whistleblower, and she was that one girl that is accusing the popular boy of doing this to her. 13 Reasons Why, everybody knows that she has committed suicide, and she's left these tapes behind, documenting and telling everybody exactly what happened to lead her up to this point. So that 13 Reasons Why, in my opinion, is the extreme of the extreme in telling us what could happen when we push this too far, when it goes unnoticed too long. One of my articles talks about the gender roles in bullying. So we see the typical male and female types of bullying. Males tend to go towards physical violence. So it's often more seen and more noticed by the adults and the parents because it leaves marks. They get physical, and somebody's going to have a broken something or a bruised something. There's going to be something there that shows. But she made a mention of when it's girls, when it's female on female bullying, it gets glossed over as quote unquote normative female behavior. And I made a mention of this in my introduction, because with the guys, we see them beating each other to a pulp and we're like, oh my gosh, he's bullying him, we need to stop this. But with girls, and I mentioned Mean Girls, the movie Mean Girls, we made a movie about it.
That's exactly what came to my mind.
We
That
made
is all about.
We made a movie about it, and yet it's still happening. We still say, oh, they're just being girls. Girls will be girls. There's going to be mean girls in high school. We've accepted it in our social structure. So much so that we've got all of this media out there, these social media things, the Netflix shows and things like that about it. And I don't know. I'm on a soapbox about the girl thing, but I made a mention of that, and I love hate. It's like a love-hate relationship that somebody actually stood up and pointed out the fact that we're just glossing it over. So let me just keep on moving for my time. If you'll go ahead and scooch a little bit more for me, Dr. Stewart. So the research that I'm talking about, like I said, my articles, I tried to keep them all towards literature, that like the literary aspect of it, but I did throw in a few scientific studies that have been done about bullying and groups about things like that and the differences. The article that I talked about mentioning the gender differences, that was one of the scientific ones. So my articles break down what bullying is, why it's done, and who it's done by, and who it's done to, as well as how it's depicted in young adult novels. And some of mine use a legal standpoint. One of them I think is actually a legal brief about how they have used the young adult literature examples as well as the real life examples of bullying to open up a discussion and start talking about what happens, what we need to do to change it, how we can fight back. And one of my articles that talks about two books by Nicholas Moore. One of them specifically is Felita. She's one of the lines in there says something about her silence. The silence kind of egged on her anguish. So she had just been attacked by these bullies. And Felita's about, it's like an immigration kind of thing. They come over from, I think it's Puerto Rico. And she tries to fit in with these girls. And then they turn on her because their parents don't like her. So the girls feed off of their parents' ways of thinking. And then they end up bullying her and beating her so much that she falls down the stairs of her, I've lost the word, outdoor ladder on an apartment building. Somebody help me out.
Fire escape?
Fire escape.
Fire escape?
Thank you. So they're standing on the fire escape because it's set in New York in like an urban environment, and they've beaten her so badly that she falls down the stairs. She falls down the fire escape. And she just kind of goes back to her apartment and sits there, and in the silence she hears their words and she hears it and she kind of starts to internalize it, like, what am I doing wrong? Why don't they like me? Is it something that I've done? Oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, things like that. And I think that the silence eggs on the anguish, and that's what the article mentioned, because it's true. a lot of people don't see the bullying. They see the bullying. They don't see what the victim goes home and tells themselves because of the bullying.
Yeah, and we see that from so many real life bullying incidents that end up in suicide.
Exactly.
Well, that's the 13 reasons why.
Exactly. It leads up to all of this. And one of the articles said that unchecked bullying can lead to long-lasting consequences, as in, like, to where they're adults. And then it can lead victims to become bullies. Victims can turn into bullies because of all of the stuff that they've internalized from when they were bullied. All right, last slide. One more slide. So by using and breaking down the various young adult novels that the articles have chosen for this assignment, it shows us and provides us with evidence of the correlation between the topic of bullying and how the victims usually either find themselves wishing to be invisible or has the invisibility thrust upon them. So it's, again, that I think of Mean Girls. I think of Speak or Mean Girls when I talk about invisibility. Because in Speak, it was forced upon her. She was an outcast. Nobody talked to her because of what happened to her. And in Mean Girls, she ended up wishing she was invisible because she felt so different because of all the bullying. So that's what my edited collection is about.
The character in Speak, she really tries to become invisible, unseen.
Yes.
She does all kinds of, doesn't she cut herself?
She ends up to the point of wanting it all to be over, and she cuts herself, and I think is found by her art teacher, because I think, if my memory serves, she was in the supply closet of the art room.
Yeah. Is that the Chris McGee and Jenny Miskey article?
Oh, I have no idea. I think it's called. Hang on, I have my articles pulled up. I'm on split screen. I was sneaky and was looking at my PowerPoint. Which one is it? Let's see. It's called "Politicizing Young Adult Literature: Reading Anderson Speak as a Critical Text" by Janet Alsop.
Okay. Yeah, and that cutting is a way to make something invisible
become visible.
And it becomes visible. So making that pain that she experiences visible through the cutting.
And it's
All
also
right,
kind
thank
of
you.
a release as well. It's
Yeah.
a way for, like, the built-up tension of everything that's happening to be let go and just let out.
Let go. Thanks, Megan.
Let it go. You're like, okay. Thanks, guys.
All right, so we can go. Emily, are you ready?
Ready.
All right.
All right. So mine is also over LGBTQ and YA literature.
That's a lot of letters.
Yeah.
LGBTQ.
LGBTQ.
YA.
Yeah. I guess I could have done that too. Because I didn't have enough for purple, the color purple, because I was trying to do the flag.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to be creative. So this is really my first time researching LGBTQ studies. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but I've never really had the opportunity to do it until this class. And I love YA literature. I like John Green, and he really pushed me into YA lit. And I haven't read Will Grayson, but I want to. I'm excited to. So I'm kind of talking about the construction of identities and characteristics in YA narratives. So not specifically what narratives include LGBTQ characters, but how it's constructed across different narratives and novels. So I titled it Coming Out of the Pages. Did you get it?
That's really good.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm giving just an overview of just my collection. That's what I'm going to kind of talk about first. I'm going to talk about how it functions, the significance of the topics that I talk about, and the relevance. I'm just going to touch on a few of the articles that I talk about and some key points, because 10 articles is a lot to go over in a short amount of time. So I'm just going to touch on key aspects that I thought were important to include and kind of put those articles in conversation with one another. So the first thing that I really want to establish here is identity. That's a huge characteristic of YA Lit, and it's something that we've been talking about in this class a lot. And we're kind of in this stage where we're talking about it's a liminal space for our characters between childhood and adulthood, and how they're navigating this liminal space and finding their identity. It's hard enough for a straight individual, whether they're in the novel or in real life, and then to throw on top of that, that they're questioning their sexuality and where they fit and identify in that way, it makes it even more difficult. So we kind of see that we as individuals are a part of so many different communities. So we're not just a part, I'm not just a part of, I'm a woman and I'm white, but I'm also a part of a community here in this room. And so we're kind of establishing how identity is a very complex thing. And for these characters that we're reading and discussing about, throwing such a complex concept on top of the fact that they're unsure about their sexuality makes it even more difficult. And so that's when I want to reference an article by Catherine Bell. And she talks about the tensions of being a cultural outsider. And she ties that back to the outsiders and intertextuality with Will Grayson, and how you have, and the outsiders, Ponyboy refers to being on two different sides of the tracks, but they're looking at the same sunset. And so they're, at the end of the day, what separates them is also kind of what brings them together. And she talks about how in Will Grayson, you have these two characters, one is straight and one is gay, but they're both Will Grayson. They have the exact same name, but they are experiencing life in young adulthood so differently. So, with that being said, these are just some things that I noticed and that I think is significant to talk about. So, just something that Wickens touches on, she talks about including homophobic tendencies. So a lot of times we have this structure for LGBTQ novels, and you have a character who is questioning their sexuality, has either come out or hasn't, and feels marginalized. And is kind of what Megan's talked about, they're bullied, and they're ostracized, and they're put into this category. And these novels are trying to establish that that is wrong, and a way that they're doing that is they're introducing these characters that are bullying our protagonist, and they're making the protagonist feel small and insignificant to kind of promote this idea of empathy so that the reader can empathize with them and really understand what they're going through. But Wickens discusses that this can be problematic because you're kind of, by including these homophobic ideas and tendencies, you're almost advertising them indirectly, and it's not intentional, but you're still creating a space where these ideas are being heard and read, and ideas that maybe the reader might have not encountered before, but now they have. So how do we navigate with this and accommodate? So that's when I found this article. So it talks about the Hunger Games, and I couldn't italicize it. I tried, but I could not. That's okay. Okay. So they're both talking about how these dystopian novels very much are trying to go against the grain, kind of like abolish social norms. And so the Hunger Games kind of introduces sexuality as survival. And it throws out through Katniss and Peeta and Gale this idea of like a huge romance novel, because you expect, and I've read all three and I love them, you expect her to end up on this certain path, and I don't want to spoil it, but it very much redefines what romance is. And it's not your typical romance novel because it's not a romance novel. And so she's also simultaneously redefining what sexuality and what these gender norms are. So this is a way where we're not introducing a homophobic character or those ideas. Instead, we're kind of inadvertently doing it, and we're showing that these gender roles that we've kind of, these ideas and social norms that we have in our head aren't exactly how we should approach every situation in every novel. And so it's kind of helping maneuver through opposing these social norms without coming out and saying, this is what you should do, this is how you should view like sexuality, basically. So, so just the relevance of this collection, I focus a lot on the binary between female and male and gender as a performance. So how society influences gender, how we view gender.
Don't ask me.
Any idea? It'll go away. It normally does.
Okay.
Whenever it pops up like that.
So how it's relevant to how we view just the gender binaries, and how gender is very fluid. It's not something that's just fixated between a female and a male. And so how we appropriate this and the YA narrative. Well, to start, I found this book by, I forget her first name, but her last name is Town. And I read a couple of her chapters, and it was really interesting because she's talking about how children kind of are always pushing against the binaries that we try and categorize them in. Whether it's gender or anything else that you can think of, they're always trying to test limits. And so that's their way of searching for identity. And children and young adults want to be more fluid than just the categories that we put them in. So why don't we allow them to be more fluid? Identity is a very complex idea. And so if we start introducing this in literature and not necessarily just focusing on this one structure, that's what Town is arguing, that a possible goal for YA LGBTQ literature is to not subject to just one structure, one way of writing these novels that kind of promote activism and sexuality. Then I have a question and my works cited. Any questions or anything?
Got your purple end.
Yeah, that was my way of putting purple, but I couldn't get it on this. That's fine.
Excellent.
Thank
That
you.
was really good. Thank you so much.
you.
Guys, you're just knocking it out. Okay. It's a popular topic, and we didn't address it once in the novels that we read. So you're filling a gap. Thank you. Katie, did you end up putting yours in?
So I think I submitted it like 4 different ways now. Guys, my edited collection deals with abuse and bullying in adolescent lit. Essentially, I am looking at 2 different things in terms of bullying with my collection. The first is the realism and accurate portrayal of bullies in YA and adolescent lit. And the second is how the communal aspect of bullying, specifically in the school setting, forces those who are victims to become bullies themselves or to exhibit behaviors of self-harm or harm to others. So through my research, I found that as YA and adolescent literature has become more prevalent, there have been more accurate depictions of bullies. We also continue to see depictions of bullying pacts. So it less often is a single bully, and more often there will be groups of people who bully a single victim or multiple victims. And in terms of what we've learned in this class, that communal aspect of bullying leads to the isolation and invisibility of the victims of those behaviors. I also talked about how often those bullies are a result of victimization themselves. So as victims of bullying heal, they tend to either emulate the actions of their abusers, or they will act against them, sometimes turning to self-harm as an option. An example of that is 13 Reasons Why. Jay Asher's novel talks about Hannah Baker, a student who commits suicide, and she blames in tapes different bullies in her school. Other examples are This Is Where It Ends, which is a story of a school shooter who his reason for his actions is based on bullying by classmates. And then in Feed, also, we saw that as Violet tried to join Titus's group, she also feels
Sorry.
excluded and bullied as they talk about her in their feeds as a collective unit. Some of the scholarship I found on bullying, portrayals of bullying in young adult literature, was important to show that there is more realistic portrayal of bullying in the literature we're seeing now. Their abstract states that the sensitive issues dealt with in this literature, it says, promotes awareness, empathy, and social change to empower youth in school settings. Another piece of scholarship that I thought was important was it's called You Are a Flaw in the Pattern, Difference, Autonomy, and Bullying in YA Fiction. And this talks about how the idea of bullies in these novels are kind of a microcosm for what bullying functions as in a larger state. So there are larger ideals of discrimination or differences presented on a smaller scale through those bullies. For the second part of my collection, I talked about how often those who are victimized become the bullies themselves. I used Robert Cormier's Jade as an example of that. So Oscar, his behaviors are developed in response to being abused as well. So he becomes an abuser and a bully, acting violently because of the violent actions that were performed against him. I also said Harry Potter has several examples of victims becoming bullies. We have Draco Malfoy, who's victimized by his parents as well as other Death Eaters, and then Snape, who is victimized by Harry Potter's father, James, to turn into a bully for Harry as well as the other students. Okay, so why is this important? I said there are three reasons. First, as adolescent lit continues to more accurately portray those packs of bullies and the resulting behaviors of victimization, it allows for growth and understanding for readers to draw into their own real world situations. Second, the realism and accuracy of those circumstances will help to develop young adult and adolescent literature as what Coates called destination literature. So her scholarship talked about how often we think of young adult and adolescent literature as kind of pass-through literature, where we are leading up to or learning to read and comprehend as we move to more sophisticated texts. But as we see more accuracy and realism in this genre, it will hopefully become more of the intended destination rather than ways to an end. And then the third was that statement that Hughes and Leffier wrote, which was that the accurate representations of bullying in YA and adolescent lit promote awareness, empathy, and social change to empower youth in school settings. So I hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. So we have 2 bullying so far and 3, is that right? No, 2 and 2, 2 bullying and 2 LGBTQ, right? So far? All right. 13 Reasons Why is the groundbreaking text, I think, for discussions of bullying but you know, it's all over young adult literature because that's one of the major issues that they face, whether it's bullying from schoolmates, from kids from different grades, you know, the older kids ganging up on the younger kids, the so-called dweeb or nerd that they gang up on, and this sexual assault. There seems to be quite a few categories. Anybody think of anything to add to the bullying? It doesn't seem to be, the novels don't seem to be helping any, because it's an epidemic. You know, is it Instagram that they're going to stop doing the visible likes, that the person who posts sees how many likes that nobody else does?
Interesting.
So as to help preserve the posters.
Well, it would be so they're probably not comparing how
That's
many
it.
likes.
Yes,
that they're-
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, was it a Twilight Zone? A new Twilight Zone? There was I don't remember what it was. Black Mirror, I don't know. But there was a episode on in a science fiction series that people got points for being liked, and the more points they got, the more privileges they got. So their credit scores would go higher with the higher number of likes that they got, and they would also drop. So somebody could set out to sabotage and or
So
yeah.
no,
Yes.
so Dr. Stewart, that's an episode in the Black Mirror, but that's also what's
Thank you.
happening. That's also what's happening in China, where some regions are being reprimanded for having debt. Your credit score is pinned down, so you can't take a loan and you can't take planes. You can't take a plane to go anywhere. So it's happening in
man.
real life, and it's happening on Black Mirror.
Prescient. It is prescient. Our science fiction is. It just takes a little bit, and it seems like it pushes the envelope, but it turns out it doesn't push the envelope. That's the funky thing about science fiction. Okay, thank you. Katie.
Can I go next?
Yes, you can.
This will keep things balanced. Surprise, surprise. Although I did kind of go in a bit of a different direction from Emily and Andrea, I focus on just gay males. So I'm talking about the history and problems in gay young adult novels. This is just a little outline, a little bit of backstory, some of the recurring plots. There's pretty much 3 that occur across decades, and then changing representations in interesting ways and with some interesting mental acrobatics. So I have so far read 7 articles, and every single one of them refers to this text right here as the first young adult text to specifically deal with homosexuality as part of the plot, as opposed to it's just mentioned in passing. It's about 2 male friends in New York City. One of them is definitely gay. One of them kind of isn't sure because they're still pretty young. They're like 14, I think. And there's abuse going on in the background, but some of the reviews are slanted. And by that, I mean, at this time, the reviewers were saying, all these people will tell you that this book is about homosexuality, but here's what it's really about. And if you can focus on this, then it's okay. Many of these texts are what we would call problem novels. They are dealing with identity, as we've been talking about tonight, while not actually focusing directly on identity. Evelyn Serrano, The Rock and the River, these young adults are figuring out who they are based on a problem outside of their own life.
Planet of Junior Brown is very definitely one of those problem novels.
Mhm.
I mean, it was clearly categorized as one of those.
I would say more so with Buddy, because he's...
Just the nature of it, because some of the characteristics of the problem novel included an inner city setting, graphic details into the workings of somebody's mind. It pretty, straightforward and blunt, whether it's language or whether it's just knowing, being in a really awful situation. So those are a couple of the characteristics of the problem novels of the 70s.
So I have down here that my articles have identified 3 ideological bents. These are the different plots I mentioned. From the late 60s till about the early 90s, the problem was homosexuality at all, any kind. That was the problem. That was the curse of these characters. Then it kind of sort of shifted to homophobia. As Emily mentioned, I actually have that same article. No, I'm jumping the gun. I'll get to that in another slide. The problem became homophobia around the 90s as there was more visibility and the culture was becoming a little more, I don't want to say accepting, but tolerant, which is one of our favorite words here.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have now, although it's still pretty new, the characters just happen to be gay, and really the book is about something else. But that's,
by the way.
yeah, by the way, but that's still pretty new and not really all the way formed yet. This quote was pretty interesting to me because like all the other articles confirmed it, from about the 1970s on for like the first couple decades. If one of the characters or several of them were gay, somebody was going to die, and it was probably going to be because of a car. It wasn't suicide. It was some kind of like overarching judgment, like it's okay that they're gay, but by the way, they're hit by a car before
It's
the book's
punishment.
end. Yeah.
It's a form of punishment.
And if we go back to this one, immediately after the 2 friends kiss, the dog gets killed. Immediately.
Spoiler alert.
But 1969, you've had time to read it.
That happens with pregnancy, girls having sex, they get punished, die, get pregnant, get an STD, whatever. But frequently they die. And so that's the punishment for them for being loose.
Mhm.
I put that in quotation marks.
Society's okay with it, but a higher power will get you.
That's right. And really, that's what society wants, mainstream society.
This was interesting, and I'm still trying to honestly unpack it all myself. But this, Kirk Guas was saying that positioning young adult literature as an appropriate avenue for exploring questions of sexuality rather than, basically what this is saying is that many people believe children don't have any kind of sexuality at all before they reach a certain age, before they reach puberty. And some authors are saying, no, it's there, it's just not physical, it's not romantic, but they have an idea of the kind of person they will be or will not be. It doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, whoever you are. That is there. A lot of people will say, no, you can't talk to children about this, they won't get it, they're too young to know. But then those same people will tell like a little baby, oh, he's such a strong man, or a heartbreaker, and he's like 1 year old. So there's kind of a double standard going on there about what children do and do not understand. This was really interesting to me. Emily talked about including homophobia and how these texts frame that. This article was talking about Canadian literature that features gay characters. And as of when this article was published, which was 2005, I believe, there were only 15 books, like 15. Whereas in America, there was well over 100. And these were 2 of the most popular ones. Bad Boy came out in 1989, and the other one was 2001. They are told from the point of view of a homophobic bully who you are supposed to sympathize with and agree with. The reason I say that is because in both stories, it's a straight boy and his really good friend, and then like halfway through the book, it's discovered that the friend is gay, and then the straight boy feels victimized. the straight boy feels betrayed. How could you betray me like this? We were alone together. We rode in the car together. We were on the hockey team together. You have betrayed me. In one of these, yeah. In one of them, the gay character is ostracized. In one of them, the gay character is killed by a car. Because
That's the title of your article, Killed by a Car.
pretty much. One of these articles ended by saying, yes, something to the effect of, yes, the straight protagonist grew and overcame this, but the dead boy is still dead. The dead gay boy is still dead. So,
Is that the article from Bad Boy to Dead Boy?
yes.
I included that one too.
Are you doing this topic too?
No, I just did marginalization.
Okay, yes. David Levithan kind of changed the scene a little bit. To give just a little bit of a background on where we were when this was published, in 2003, Lawrence v. Texas was struck down in the state of Texas. 2 consenting adults in the privacy of their own home, in their own bedroom, curtains closed, if they were of the same sex found together, they were going to jail, period. And then the following year, Massachusetts became the first state to legalize same-sex marriage. That has nothing to do with this book. It's just a little background. One of my articles talked about how Boy Meets Boy was a utopian text, meaning it would have to exist in a utopia in order for this couple to be together without any kind of harassment. And specifically the town that they're in, it's just, they mentioned that the gender roles and sexuality roles were kind of porous and fluid, and nobody really paid that much attention to them anymore. As I mentioned earlier, I tried reading it and I thought it was kind of boring. But this was a big deal for young adult literature. David Levithan published this in 2003. 10 years later, 2 boys kissing. And they're on the cover, 2 boys kissing. Also really groundbreaking. That is about, they're trying to break the record for the longest kiss ever. And I think the record was like 32 hours or
Oh my
something.
gosh.
Yeah, like, and they were doing it in front of their school. It was a big deal. And then since then, representations have continued to change. Sometimes these characters are the part of the novel, like in these. Sometimes they're just in the background, like in City of Bones. Yes, like.
We'd see that.
Yes. Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, I was actually really disappointed because it still felt like the problem of homosexuality at all. It felt like it was decades outdated, even though it just came out, I think, about 4 years ago. So there's still changes that could happen. I think that's where I stopped. Yeah, I only cited 2, but I have my other sources. Yeah. Questions?
Have you read
concerns?
We See Bad?
I have not. It's going to be a movie.
It's funky. I didn't like it because it was it's really postmodern. And I wasn't accustomed to reading text like that when I first encountered it. It just didn't appeal to me because it was so funky. And I can't even explain why now. I think it was kind of like reading Feed with the language, like, you know, how they all talk. And I think We See Bad had something. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent.
I've read Simon, What If It's Us? Actually, I read those like commuting to this class this semester, and Will Grayson, but it's been a while.
Excellent. Well done. I'm really happy with this presentation. Thank you.
Now we need another bullying one.
Well, I'm going next. It's not bullying. So now for something completely different. Utterly and entirely and completely different. Okay. So mine is on children's and young adult literature that deals primarily with forced migration. So I focus specifically on Japanese internment, but also on like migrant farmers and illegal immigrants. Like whenever we're talking about, well, you'll see. So specifically, whenever I looked at Japanese internment, Yoshiko Uchida.
Mhm.
She is the primary driving force behind Japanese internment literature. She holds the corner of the market. And so the vast majority of the things that I found that dealt with Japanese internment dealt with her books, because she's got children's books like the bracelet that we read for picture books. But she also has a couple of different young adult novels, like you see the one up here is The Invisible Thread. That's one of the most popular ones. And then obviously we have Weed Flower, which I did finish listening to, by the way. And you're right, it was okay. It wasn't like earth-shattering or amazing, but it's the first Japanese internment book that I've ever read. So that made it stand out for me. But also, whenever we're looking at migrant workers or immigrants, we've got Esperanza Rising, which we're all very familiar with. Return to Cinder is one by Julia Alvarez. I haven't read it, but I've read several articles that specifically mention that one.
It's a Newberry.
Mm-hmm. And then we also have Sofia Mendoza's Guide to Getting Lost in Mexico. This one is interesting in that it has a girl get stuck in Mexico and not in the United States. Like her parents moved to the United States and they move here legally, everything's good, but then their documentation expires and they never renew it. They never follow the steps to renew their visas. And so Sophie goes to Mexico to Tijuana for a fun, just girls trip, and then can't get back in.
Oh, crap.
Because she didn't know that she was technically a Mexican citizen and not an American citizen. She grew up here. She doesn't know anything different. She was super young whenever they got here, so she had no idea. And so it's about her being forced basically back to Mexico and learning what it's like learning her Mexican heritage with her relatives that still live there. So,
is it good?
I haven't read it.
It sounds really good.
It sounds fantastic. It's on my list. So I love the fact that it was different. Because, you think about forced migration, you think about people moving to the United States or moving around in the United States for farming work. And that was completely and utterly different. So I appreciated that a lot. So the way that my edited collection is going to function, obviously I'm going to be focusing on diaspora. Diaspora? Yes. I keep hearing diaspora in my head. and so we'll have those two different types. So we've got the Japanese internment, and then we have the forced migration. So the reason why this is going to be important is because it validates the experiences of first, second, and third generation, either immigrants or, in the case of internment, the Japanese young adults who are growing up with parents or grandparents who served in internment camps, and thus, many of them don't talk about it because it's shame. And if you know anything about the Japanese culture, shame is a very real thing, and they wear it heavily. And so it's one of those things we just don't speak about it. We're going to pretend like it didn't happen. This is validating the fact that it did happen, and it also gives them an important piece of their cultural history. Also, it educates those who might otherwise be unaware. We know that one of the reasons why we read young adult literature is not only to find ourselves in the pages, but also to learn. Most of us are not going to go pick up a history book I think I want to learn about Japanese internment. What history book can I read about? And we also know that history books, especially if they're written by white men or just Americans in general, are going to paint ourselves in the best light. And so if we go to the literature, then we have authors who either live that experience, have parents or family members that live that experience, live in community with other people who have that experience. And so even though they're writing fiction, we're more likely to get an authentic representation of what it's like, rather than our interpretation or what we want people to remember it being like.
Counter narratives.
Yes, definitely. So obviously it's also going to expose injustice. So if the white person's not writing it, we can't make ourselves look good, right? There is nothing pretty about Japanese internment. One of the articles that I read was talking about how the FBI and what was then the CIA had conducted several missions and searches to see if there was any validity to Japanese Americans being spies or like working for the enemy, and they found absolutely none. And 1 week after they found absolutely nothing is when Roosevelt signed the internment order, knowing that there was nothing to prove that these people had anything to do with anything. He didn't care. The American public didn't care. They just wanted them away and contained where they couldn't do anything. And maybe y'all knew this and I just like lived in a hole in the ground. I didn't know that most Japanese internment camps were situated on Indian reservations.
I didn't know that.
They shared Indian reservations, and they did this because then like the relocation effort brought money into the reservations to build structures, to make it more civilized, to make it more productive. They use the Japanese workers to cultivate it and to grow things because Japanese people are good at growing things, quote unquote, for those people who can't see me. So all of these things are reasons why they brought the Japanese and put them there. And also they're already contained, right? And something else I learned is that they would send the prisoners, the people they arrested and put in like actual legitimate work camps, they sent them north to where it was cold, and they didn't tell them they were going to do that. So they didn't have any warm clothes. But if I was left behind and I was then sent to an internment camp, I'm assuming it's going to be cold because that's where my relatives are. So I pack all my cold things, and then I'm sent to the desert. And so they were only allowed to bring so much, and they brought the wrong clothes. So injustices, things that you just don't know, that you won't get from history books. And obviously, too, like I'm focusing hardcore on the Japanese internment because I feel like most people don't know that. In Texas, we know a lot about the migrant experience, maybe not all of it, probably not all of it, but we know a lot. So, but like injustices with treating people like criminals, we see that, at the centers on the borders where they're keeping children and parents separated, where there's not clean water, where they're overcrowded. Like these are things that we know. These aren't necessarily things other people are going to know around the United States because it's not on their doorstep. So it also humanizes those who are or were demonized in history. Like we put the Japanese in internment camps because they're scary, they're terrible, they're gonna get us. Okay, we tell immigrants you can't come in because you might do something sometime at some point. And so by telling the stories here, it makes them more relatable. It drives our empathy. It makes us think past what the news and the media are telling us. What the history books tell us is the truth. And then finally, it demonstrates a variety of ways to resist and push back against the status quo. One of the ways they do this, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide too, is the book called Return to Sender. One of the main characters, her name is Mary, and she writes letters that she never gets to send. Okay? But by telling the main part of her part of the novel through letters, it makes us the addressees. We're the stand-ins because nobody else is reading them except her. So it forces you into that narrative and puts you in a position that you wouldn't be if you were just a reader. So it's very interesting. Relevance and significance. So we have this whole concept of outsiders versus insiders. And one of the articles that I read specifically talked about how neither one of them is right or wrong per se. They serve different purposes. So if you're an insider, obviously you can explain this is how and why we do things. This is how we celebrate things. This is why we celebrate things. This is what all of this means. But then the outsiders can say, okay, this is how we're interpreting what you're doing. This is how we interpret what we see. This is why we think you do it. So it's just, you need to know who your writer is so you know what you're being an audience to. And so an informed reader is the best reader. Know whether your person is an insider or outsider. Secondly, is this duality and this doubling. So we've got Japanese Americans who are grappling with the fact that, yes, I'm Japanese, but I'm also American. I'm not American enough to fit in to the United States because I don't have the right look, but I'm not Japanese. Whenever I visit Japan, I'm not them. Like, we don't have the same cultures. We don't have the same values exactly. We have some of the same heritage, but we're still not the same. And so same thing for that we saw whenever I was telling you about Sophie Mendoza, who gets stuck in Mexico. Her values and her thoughts, like she's like, I am not Mexican, I'm American, I don't want anything to do with any of this. But then she learns the positive sides of also being Hispanic, Latina, and Mexican. Like there's beauty to that. There's beauty in community and in family, and like there's a lot about food preparation too, but we'll get into that later. The importance of community, which is the family you choose. Okay, so obviously because Japanese Americans and Mexican Americans don't necessarily feel like they fit into white American society, they put an extra emphasis on the community that they do have. And sometimes, you could even argue most of the times, this is to their detriment. One of the articles that I read was that it was talking about how America did not want Japanese Americans congregating together because then it looked like they were up to something. But at the same time, if they didn't band together, they had no one because America wouldn't accept them. And lots of times it's the same way with our migrant farm workers. They have to band together because they're not accepted into the general culture. We were talking earlier this afternoon about Lacan's traumatic thing. So Lacan argues that there are some things that you just cannot put into words. And so that's why thing is italicized and capitalized. It's the thing. And he argues that the traumatic thing is at the center of every single person's being, and how they act and the way they are, why they do what they do, is all in relation to the trauma that has happened to them. Which is a pretty dark way of looking at things.
It was very dark.
It's pretty dark. And so this article that I was reading talked about the different ways to approach the traumatic thing. And so, like, first of all, through picture books and lots of colors, vivid, eye-catching things, and then moving into more narration and verbalizing things. And then once you can see it and you can talk about it, and then you are no longer a victim to it. That's how you graduate out and up and fully process the trauma. And so while only one article talked about the traumatic thing, now that you know what it is, you see it everywhere. And it's not just Japanese American literature or migrant workers literature. It's everybody. It's the Kobayashi Maru that we were talking about last week. It's the traumatic thing. And then the power of the epistolary narrative. That's the one I was telling you about Return to Sender, where everybody plays multiple roles. So not only is the reader playing multiple roles of, like, I'm reading this novel, but I'm also reading and being the addressee that never gets the letters that Mary is sending. But Mary is also, they call her the experiencing self and then the narrating self. So she has lived these things and she's also writing these things. And so it goes back to that duality. Everybody gets to be a part. Everybody has multiple selves, multiple subjectivities. And so it's just a matter of knowing who you're dealing with at the time. And so that is it. So I have my works cited, the other things I'm going to be talking about.
That's wonderful.
So
Really well done.
awesome. Yay. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay, may I start? Okay. My reading collection is on the representation of trauma in young adult novels. Let me first talk a little about young adult trauma novels. Young adult trauma novels are problem novels, or
based or issue-based novels are not something new. Actually, Susan Lewis Hinton's The Outsider in 1967 is considered as the first young adult novel that dealt with the darker side of adolescent life by showing the violence of America's gang culture. But generally, young adult trauma novels most explicitly display kind of profound and intense traumatic experience of one or more characters that are struggling with a kind of traumatic memories or mental challenges. But these such dark and sad and heavy topics are not really easy to write about or to read about. But teens need such heavy books to engage with as much as they need such entertaining, fluffy and light books to escape to. But when we talk about young adult trauma novels, the first question that comes to our mind is why young adult fiction needs to tell such trauma stories. Aren't they frustrating themes for teenage readers? But just consider that reading such trauma novels help teenage readers get more familiar with social and emotional problems, and therefore they can develop a kind of insight into themselves. Besides, by reading about characters who are struggling with such traumatic experiences and just such as domestic violence, readers can understand, okay, these characters can overcome such traumatic experiences by finding some strength and resources to cope and thrive, so they can do the same thing as those characters. Therefore, overcoming obstacles and developing strength through hardship by those traumatized characters are not frustrating or depressing. Instead, they can be, those novels can give power or inspiration or hope to the readers, to the point that we can consider reading such trauma books as a kind of therapy, which we call bibliotherapy. Therefore, bibliotherapy, in fact, is based on the reader's identification with characters or situations, or their emotional engagement with the characters when they resolve their problems, and the reader's idealization that they are not alone. So in case of any problems, just like those characters, they can overcome those problems and find solutions to their challenges. Considering these points, in my mind, I consider an introduction and 4 parts for my edited collection. The first 3 parts focus on domestic violence in different forms: physical abuse, abandonment, sexual abuse, and the last part is on traumatic memory. In part 1, I consider 2 chapters. Chapter 1 addresses the notion of physical abuse in Freaky Green Eyes, and chapter 2 addresses the same notion in Small Stitches and Memoir. Part 2 consists of only 1 chapter, but it addresses the notion of abandonment in 2 different novels by 2 different novelists, Refugee Boy and Solace of the Road. Chapter 3 is actually the largest, part 3 is the largest part of this edited collection, chapter focusing on sexual abuse. Chapter 4 addresses the notion of sexual abuse in raw blue, but chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8, these 4 chapters actually address the same notion in one particular novel, Speak by Anderson, because Speak is considered as the most acclaimed and the most popular trauma novel that deals with the notion of sexual abuse. Therefore, I found actually a good number of scholarships on Speak. And then, of course, sexual abuse has been dealt with in these 4 chapters from different points of view. And chapter 4 is on traumatic memory. Okay, chapter 9 addresses this notion in the Maze Runner, and chapter 10 again deals with the same notion, but in 2 different novels by 2 different novelists. The Adoration of Jean Fox and Belger, though the titles of these 2 novels have not been included in this in the title of this chapter. Here is a list of the 9 novels, trauma novels, that the articles deal with. The articles that I have chosen deal with, and these are the 2 novels that the article the titles of which have not been included in the title of the last article I showed you. So, and here is a list of the keywords.
Such a happy.
Yes. The keywords, the words that are actually repeated in the articles I've read, words such as trauma, abuse, depression, disorder, PTSD, insomnia, dark and sad themes, recovery, healing, and the like. But in order to understand this edited collection and also the trauma, generally speaking, all the trauma novels and the articles written on them, it's good to know the definition of some of these basic words like trauma, traumatic moments, and PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's start with trauma. Trauma is the response to a deeply disturbing or distressing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness, and diminishes the sense of self and the ability to feel the full range of emotional and experiences. Traumatic moments result from an series of events or a set of circumstances that experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful and threatening, that have lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, and spiritual well-being. And the last word is, the last concept is post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. When you experience a traumatic event, your body creates a sort of stress response, which make you feel a variety of physical symptoms. Therefore, you may behave differently considering the normal ways you behave, and experience certainly more intense emotions. But there are actually there is a variety of symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, but I put these for here because these are the ones that not only the authors of the article mentioned, but also we can hear these symptoms directly from the characters, the traumatized characters of those novels. So anxiety or panic, depressive withdrawal, intrusive thoughts, and sleep are among those symptoms of PTSD that were repeated, as I said, not only by the authors, but also directly the characters mention those, like, for example, when they complain about insomnia. Do you want me to read them or like okay? So trauma therapy, a lesson the reader may learn. Almost all those trauma novels and the articles that have been written on them try to convey one message to their teenage readers, and that the more one tries to think about a revisiting a traumatic place, avoids contact with any potential triggers of traumatic event, the more likely that person will suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So they all emphasize that the traumatized character or the traumatized person should speak out, should talk about those traumatic events to somebody instead of hiding those events and suffering. Therefore, when these distressing thoughts come up, the traumatized person must welcome them and speak them out. The pain we experience after living through a trauma is there to guide us in the future and to see what lessons there are to learn that may protect us from a future loss. So, almost, particularly we see it in the in Speak by Anderson, but almost all of those trauma novels emphasize that this is the solution. If somebody wants to get rid of trauma, he needs to speak out. And speaking out is actually a stage that the traumatized person must go through in order to get to healing stage. So these are the first steps. Actually, the traumatized person goes through. First, he experiences trauma, then PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that I put, like, for example, anxiety, fear, intrusive thoughts, insomnia, these things, and then speaking out, which is an essential stage that should go, that the traumatized person must go through in order to get to the last stage, which is healing. Therefore, in this, in the introduction of my edited collection, I will go over these 4 stages, and just by demonstrating evidence of a close and careful reading of those articles, I will try to take all those articles into kind of conversation with each other and just try to show the similarities and the differences between those authors mentioned in 10 different articles.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like you've really done some stuff here.
Yes, I put lots.
Who wants to go next? Oh, yeah, it's Jeannie.
Such a book I have for you. You should check it out.
Buy it, they're only $95.
That's right.
It's published by Routledge, it's $200.
This presentation is about adolescent literature and about race and ethnicity and their role in and invisibility. This is my working title. I'm not so sure that this will be it, but invisibility requires insight. The important thing is that we're talking about giving visibility and voice to the hidden and silenced. So who is invisible? Well, just about everybody we met this semester. And there are more. The first 3 novels were really overtly devoted to, or not devoted, but emphasized invisibility. But then many of the others did apply. And then we didn't get to a Native American, but, and I know you're not supposed to say all, but pretty much film and lit, they've been silent. And then I threw in Velvet Brown in National Velvet, if any of you remember that, where she takes the disguise, mask wearing. So
She dresses as a boy, is that right?
yes, because only a boy could ride the horse, and they had to fire the jockey. And so many more are invisible as well. Race's role in invisibility. Race's role in invisibility. Why are the characters invisible? Is it merely race and ethnicity? What other things? There can be other things that overlap to it or play a role in it. And some examples cross race and ethnicity. And I don't know if it's on another slide, I don't think it is. Is it merely race and ethnicity? Well, I thought of 2, Parvana and what was another one that we had where, the Native American. Those are really both complicated by not just race, but geography. And they just had the bad luck to be in a bad place. Parvana and the Native Americans just got run over. So the way I was going to arrange things, I thought first I would do the article that we all read that Susan wrote, because it's such a good primer, a good introduction, and as will my introduction be as well, but not as well. So I put that first. It does start in, like, it refers to Ellison, it was 1952 maybe, so it goes way back. But, and I had thought about putting Jesse Jackson next. Has anyone read Call Me Charlie? Sounds terrific, and even if you don't read the book, the article is great. And it could be first because it was done, well, I think that's the next slide. Jesse Jackson, and then also Planet of Junior Brown. Those all talk about blackness, and I realize that there's some, I've forgotten which one, if it's feed or what you've got in there, but there's some white in that as well, but okay. The Jesse Jackson article is by Amanda Greenwell. The book is by the Jesse Jackson that we all know, orator and reverend. And who knew he was accomplished enough and articulate enough that in 1945, Harper and Row approached him. And so this book is really a pioneering book because, and that's the reason I put it second. It was in 1945 that he wrote this book. So I thought about putting it first, but I put it after I thought this was much more introductory.
Why would it be such a surprise that he wrote it?
Oh, well, not a surprise that he wrote it, but a surprise that they approached him, and that all those years ago he was already well known enough to be approached by a publishing company. It just really surprised me. But he was a natural voice because he was eloquent, is eloquent, and I guess they had him kind of speaking for the race in this book. In this book, Call Me Charlie, that's the title, and it's about segregated recreation in 1945. And Charlie does not, you know how some of our characters have kind of accepted invisibility or wallowed in it, like Ozzy in Fade. But Charlie had a plan. He had a good friend that was what? The book, this is the plot of the book. The book had Charlie having a white friend. And together, Jackson's thinking was that this would be a good help for easing into interracial relationships. And in the book, Charlie wants to, here are his goals. He wants to try for these are all recreational things that he thinks that he can break the barrier. So he wants to try for the boys club membership, try for the swimming pool membership, and try for a part in the school play. Now, he wins the contest. He and his white friend are partners, and he wins the contest for the swimming pool contest. And they award him the prize in front of everybody. And when he awards Charlie the prize, he says, "See me later." And so a little before later, his white friend says to him, they probably just want to give you a locker because he's certainly never been a member of the swimming pool group. But what happened was, instead, when he got there, he went to the person who had given him the prize, and the price of the membership was $10. And so the person took his ticket back and gave him a $10 bill and said, you know, you can't be in the swimming pool. And that's the reason the name of the book is Call Me Charlie. So, horrible insult. Also, and in the book, it remains unresolved about the swimming pool. He did get the part in the play, but the part in the play was he was a soldier, and there were black soldiers, and of course he was speaking a script. So he wasn't really getting to say anything from his heart. So he was allowed to be in the school play. But the swimming pool, they said it remained unresolved. In my book, he didn't achieve that. But this was done in 1945, and then there was a weighed-in protest in public water in 1961. I don't remember if it was an ocean or a lake, but it took a protest in 1961. So in 16 years, they made the progress of that they could protest and put their feet in public water somewhere where whites swim. So not much progress on integrating swimming pools. Anyway, it's a terrific book, and I haven't read it, but I'm sure it's good, and the article is too. The second part is kind of other groups, kind of miscellaneous other groups. So I have the first one, Jewish, invisible, who knew? The barbed wire, probably the same article that you used for Japanese. And then The Only Good Indian by Sharon Smulders, which talks about Laura Ingalls' book, Wilder's books. And actually, I thought the book was Little House in the Big Woods, but that's the TV show, but that's the name of the article, so.
There were several.
Oh, okay.
There were like 10, 12.
Right. I knew there were
novels.
several. Okay. So you think some of the novels were named Little House on the Prairie?
I do know they were.
Oh, okay.
One was.
Okay. So we can't talk about all of them, of course, but I thought I'd mention a little bit about the Jewish article. It's by Suzanne Ron. And it really was an invisibility of absence till the 70s. And way back in the 1800s, when they were visible, when Jewish characters were visible, they were defamed, pretty much. It was pretty brutal language. They were characterized as terrible people. And, we know Fagin, who was a pickpocket or a thief. And then in Anne of Green Gables, who'd remember this? I don't even know that I ever read the book, but there was a peddler in the book who sold her hair dye in 1908, but it made her hair turn green. And it made a point of that the peddler was Jewish, and that all he cared about was the money, and she shouldn't have trusted him. So they were really portrayed as bad people. Then things were so bad that there was a contest in 1900. It was a few years, annual contest. And it was put on by a children's magazine. And the contest was the readers could submit their entries and invite to an imaginary dinner party, invite their 10 favorite characters. And dribble by dribble, year by year, many children chose Jewish characters, maybe unknown to them. And one of the common ones mentioned was Rebecca, who was apparently the damsel in distress in Ivanhoe. And that Ivanhoe was so popular that Rebecca even became a popular name. So they thought that might turn the tide for anti-Semitism in literature. But in 1913 and in 1920, there were two separate terrible scandals. And in 1920, they published it in English. These are kind of notes for me, so you can't make sense of it. But it was published in English, so it really spread. And it was a worldwide, it was a Russian forgery about a worldwide plan of the Jewish people to take over the world. And the article said that even now, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic groups still, even though that was debunked.
That's pretty common knowledge that anti-Semitic groups still
say that?
Have you not heard anything about the response to Trump and
Oh, yes.
anti-Semitism?
Oh, yes, yes. But I'm talking about they still cling to this plan from 1920.
Yes.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you mean maybe with regard to Kirshner?
With regard to a lot of things,
Okay.
but that's okay.
Okay. All right. So then in about 1933, a lot of Jewish people started fleeing Europe because of the Nazis. And we got a lot of talented people from them. And so even though they really flooded into the US, it took until 1940s during World War II for the children's books to start reflecting some Jewish characters. And the article said, I don't remember the explanation it gave, maybe just time, but I think it was because they waited for the market, because with all these Jewish people coming in, their children wanted books with Jewish characters. So at any rate, they said that a lot of times the children's books would have Jewish characters, but they would maybe be invisible to most children, or maybe just American children, non-Jewish children, but they would be disguised so that adults could see it by Jewish names, which we would recognize and maybe little children wouldn't, or even adolescents, and physical characteristics, like it would say beautiful hook nose, kind of brutal descriptions, and an uncle, Mose, I think, in one book, who said, vel, vel, vel. And so it was obvious to adults. Then they said, though, even though it was invisible to children, that it was nice that there were Jewish characters. It was a shame that they were invisible to children, except maybe it wasn't such a shame because it slowed the seepage of anti-Semitism into children because of these other things, the brutal physical descriptions and that kind of thing. With that immigration, we got, of course, the Diary of Anne Frank, 47, Maurice Sendak. Maybe if you guys had picture books, you might remember his name. He was a famous illustrator. Now, I don't know if he's still alive, but now.
Where the Wild Things Are.
Yes. That one.
Yeah. And he wrote lots of picture books.
Oh, he wrote them. I thought he was just the illustrator.
No, he wrote them.
Okay, I think that, okay.
And he illustrated some.
Oh, okay, right, because that's what the article said, I think. And then The Winged Watchman, even though I wrote this just for me, The Winged Watchman is a book that, if you have interest, sounded really touching.
Can you we have to get one more person in.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So instead of talking about novels, you can talk about the scholarship.
Yes, okay. So in the next part, what I'm using these articles, and I threw in, although I haven't found an article, a good part, but I also am going to discuss the role of whiteness with regard to invisibility in adolescent literature. So we all know that Fade Feed are there, and I also threw in National Velvet, as I mentioned earlier. Let's see. And this isn't about scholarship, but this just, you may not know who Neil Diamond is, but as I was studying about invisibility, I just couldn't get those words out of my mind. So he wrote that song in 1971.
Okay, very good. Do we have somebody that can do theirs in about 10 minutes or less?
My name is Stephanie Franklin, and my collection is entitled Chasing Invisibility. Adolescence is that strange period between childhood dreams and adulthood realities. However, Other than going through the ups and downs of puberty, no one adolescent is the same. Teenagers navigate the world while also overcoming an intersecting variety of external factors, factors that may render them to feel invisible, or in some cases, desire it. This edited collection looks to sample the adolescents of the literary world, specifically marginalized adolescents chasing visibility that is being held back by factors such as race, culture, class, gender, and sexual identities. Scholar Caroline E. Jones states, "Teens have long sought themselves in the pages of adolescent literature, not for answers, but simply to see themselves there. Yet not all teens find themselves in those pages as frequently as others. This drives home the importance of representation and highlights the tragedy when representation is undermined, mischaracterized, or simply forgotten. This is why this collection is traveling to literary worlds of the marginalized to explore how different adolescents use their limited power to discover subjectivity and place in societies that have cornered them into labels, stereotypes, and prejudices." According to Roberta S. Treitz, the chief characteristic that distinguishes adolescent literature is the issue of how social power is deployed during the course of the narrative. Treitz states that adolescent protagonists must learn to negotiate the different social institutions within which they must function. The primary institutions this collection explores includes family, school, government, as well as what Treitz labels as social constructions of sexuality, gender, race, and class. Treitz provides a number of definitions of power, and it is the definition construed by Judith Butler that is most relevant to this collection. And I quote, "The individual is at once formed and subordinated by power, because power not only acts on a subject, but in a transitive sense, enacts a subject into being. Young adult literature is unique in that, at some level, it discusses the interaction between the individual adolescent and the institutions that shape them. These institutions are also at the head in adolescent literature for how they impact subjectivity. Invisibility evokes an evolving theme in YA novels in which the protagonist is yearning to become visible and or invisible, while learning who it is that they are. Treitz refers to the term identity politics to define the social affiliations that members of any society construct to position people in relationship to one another. These affiliations also determine how members conform to the expectations of their identified social position. Treitz explains how even adolescents who reject their predetermined social affiliations are still defined in terms of what they reject. Robin McCallum also evokes the notion of identity, as she defines the evolution of self as formed in dialogue with society, with language, and with other people. It is a human's adolescence that undergoes rapid and radical transformation of subjectivity. How do these institutions, from family, government, school, to social constructions such as gender and race, and that quest for subjectivity, render a character invisible or help them exhibit visibility? This collection of essays aims to have the reader construct their answer through the scholarship that examines wide literature involving marginalized characters who look for their place in societies that tend to erase their conceived essence. My collection is divided into two sections that discuss marginalized groups. The first concerns race and culture. An example of an essay I have included in this section is Tim Engel's and Fern Corey's What Does She See? The White Gaze in Postmodern Triple Consciousness and Walter Dean Mayer's Monster. The relevance of this entry into my collection is how the authors chronicle the power of the white gaze, as well as its cost and consequence upon non-white adolescents, as the authors demonstrate how protagonist Sam's identity crisis accumulates into an erasure of self, as he must practice what is deemed an acceptably black version of himself in order to survive. The second part of my collection concerns itself with essays that fall under the LGBTQ+ umbrella.
Look at that.
An example is Transphobic Tropes in Young Adult Fiction, an analysis of Brian Katcher's Almost Perfect, by Barbara Penny, Wendy Keyes, and Damian W. Riggs. The authors provide an in-depth analysis of Almost Perfect to demonstrate how transphobic tropes can amount to erasure of positive visibility upon already underrepresented trans youth in fiction. The essay follows how the novel renders the trans character Sage invisible through a series of narrative tropes and hegemonic standards of gender and sexuality, and how an rise in misogyny and misgendering effectively hinders Sage's subjectivity. This two-part collection includes essays that examine the intersecting ways race, culture, sexuality, and gender identity can lead young adult characters of fiction into both visibility and invisibility. Some essays included will no doubt be controversial due to their unpopular stance of popular works. However, they are needed in order to provide a different voice to the conversation. These essays tackle the effect of the white gaze upon non-white ethnicities. They tackle hidden and miscategorized identity of gender and sexuality. These works follow the paths of adolescents who must grow, adapt, and perhaps even resist and combat worlds that shun them, as they open new paths to self-discovery and definition. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. All right. So everybody know what's going on for 2 weeks from now. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Be safe. Be happy. And come back the following week, and we'll finish this all up. And email me with questions that you have. Sound good? All right. Bye, everybody.